Good morning, church family. I hope everybody is still staying safe and healthy during this coronavirus, uh, and that you're taking the necessary precautions, wearing your mask out in public, keeping your social distance and everything, so we can, try to keep this virus under control. So I hope everybody is still safe and healthy, even during this very trying time. But today we are back for another Bible lesson, and today's lesson is the tongue. That'll be the lesson, the tongue. The tongue is a muscle in our body, pretty much a very small one. It is used for chewing, swallowing, and speaking. It's on the surface is very, probably the smallest members. There's actually a Bible verse that says it's a little member, but it can also be the most effective, because we if we can't swallow, we can't eat or whatnot, and we can't chew, it's hard to eat, and we also communicate through our tongue by speaking, and it has a lot of other implications, and things we do in our society. We have to do it through speaking through the tongue. The tongue very is a very useful tool. And the way the Bible describes the tongue is very powerful, and it can be used for great evil or great good. Depends how you use it. If we go to James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10, and I'll be reading the King James Version like I normally do. But in James chapter 3, verse 2 through 10, it reads, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, is set on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so." So as we read here in the Bible, the Bible places a lot of emphasis on the tongue. It says it can be dangerous. It can be a great tool, but it can be very dangerous. And if we don't master it or learn how to control it, it can consume us. It describes it as a fire. It can be a little fire, but all it takes is a little fire to make it into a big fire. It's kind of like, let's say when you lie, right? You usually start off with a small lie, and in order to cover for the small lie, you have to do other lies, and then you have to lie to cover those other lies you told to cover the first lie, and then everything turns into a big lie. So the tongue is a small member, but it can turn into something very huge very quickly. Just depends on how you use it. But it also can be very positive if you use it in the correct way. Maybe a little nice thing you say can turn into a very big thing, and you never know how much it can affect people in a positive way if you just say just a little nice thing, a few nice things. But going back to the lesson, one of the ideas that we are taught in Christianity is to control our tongues. And in fact, part of being a good Christian is learning to control the tongue. If you go to James, let's go. Let's go ahead and read the Bible again. Go to earlier in the book of James, James chapter 1, verse 26. If any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is in vain. So if we say we're Christian, that we are religious people, that we're doing the right thing, but we don't control our tongue, we are lying to ourselves. Part of being a good religious person is learning self-control. It talks about the tongue here, but it also extends other ways. Controlling your tongue, controlling your actions, controlling your mannerisms. Self-control is one of the most important things we have to do to be of faith. The best people of faith are people that have learned how to control themselves, control their tongue, control their actions, and just be careful of the words they say. Now, those of you that attend the Sugarland, young adult class, because that's mostly what these Bible lessons are centered around for the young adult class. We focus on biblical application. We just don't want to know about Christ. We also want to be like Christ. We want to be Christ-like in our daily interactions. We want to take what we learn from here and be able to incorporate it in our daily lives so people can see the light inside of us. Even if we're not necessarily preaching to them, they can still see who we are just by our actions. So the question is, how do we use the tongue in our daily lives to be Christ-like? And I think if we understand the tongue, it will take us a lot further in our daily lives. For example, let's say a job interview, right? Most job interviews, if you get the job or not, is not. I'm convinced it's not really determined by your education so much. It's more of it's your tongue that's going to set you apart. My dad used to tell me that if you get to the job interview, that means whatever education background, whatever, if you got the interview, that means you're already qualified to get that job just by qualification. What's going to ensure that you actually get the job is how you interview. If you interview well, you can get the job despite maybe not having the same qualifications as another candidate. But if you don't interview well, even if you're more qualified than other people, you may not get the job. It just all depends. There's a lot of factors you got to play in your part. But that is the reason they do interviews, because if it was just strictly on how good your grades were, then they wouldn't even bother doing an interview. They'll say, this person has the best grades, I'm taking this person. But they don't do that. They do an interview. They'll take people that may be very qualified, and they'll take people that may be not quite as qualified, maybe overqualified and underqualified, but they'll still do an interview because that's going to determine if you get the job or not. Based on your tongue. Can you do the interview well? If you can, then you get the job. If you don't get the job. That's part of mastering the tongue in our daily lives. And it doesn't just stop with jobs. It can also, relationships. Usually, if that's why we go on dates, right? You try to find out about the person. That person needs to speak to you so you can understand this person's morals, their values, their thought process, and are you compatible? Everything is about the tongue, learning how to master the tongue and use your tongue to get what you want in life. So there's kind of three things I identify in how we master the tongue. Because if we master the tongue, we can become better Christians, become better people in our lives, and achieve our goals. So the first thing I would say when it comes to mastering the tongue is, what goal do you want to accomplish? That's the first thing you have to understand. What is your end goal? So like I said before, if your end goal is to get a job, then you need to cater your tongue to getting that job. Or if it's a relationship, your tongue needs to be catered to get in that relationship. If it is let's say you want to be more active in the church, serve on the table, then you need to understand that's my goal, and your tongue or your speech needs to be geared towards getting that goal, whatever it is. So you have to understand what goal you want to accomplish. 2, you need to learn the language of that goal. If people do not understand you, they won't listen to you. They won't have regard for what you have to say. So, for example, if I wanted to be let's say a sports analyst, something random like that, sports analyst. If you're going to be a sports analyst, then you have to learn about sports. Why? Because that's what a sports analyst does, right? They talk about sports, they comment on it, they talk about numbers, statistics, all things like that. So you need to learn to speak their language. You need to know sports and have a conversation about it in order to become a sports broadcaster or work in, that kind of field. If we want to be, let's say, a history professor or something. That was my degree, history professor, right? You need to learn history. You have to learn their language. You have to talk about dates and times and the impact on human history and all that silly stuff. You have to learn to speak that language. And if we want to be more Christ-like, we need to learn how to speak Christ's language. What does God want us to do? How does He want us to conduct? How do we get to heaven? If that's our goal, we need to learn to speak that language, how we get there. And that's how we get through life, is speaking the language. Because if nobody speaks your language, they're not going to understand you, they're not going to listen to you. You can't achieve your goal if you don't learn how to speak their language. The third is we must always, for mastering speech, we must always seek to have an understanding and to have positive goals. We want good results in the long run. If we go back to the scripture, let's go to Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1. A soft answer turn away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. When we master the tongue, we have to make sure the goal of mastering the tongue is to always bring positive things in our lives. We want to have good things happening. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want to grieve people. We want to use the tongue to get good, positive results. We want to have understanding. We want to understand other people. For example, usually the best way to communicate or to negotiate with people is usually not yelling out at them or over talking them. It's usually leveling with them. You understand where they're coming from. You speak to them. You talk to them. You speak their language. You have a goal in mind, and you can find your ways. If you don't force it on people, sometimes that can be more effective than the rah 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 or trying to overtalk somebody. I'll give you an example. There's this show because I'm a child at heart. I've been rewatching one of my favorite kids shows. It was called Avatar: Last Airbender. Sorry, I'm a nerd, but I was watching on Netflix recently because I was reliving my childhood. And on the show, there is this, to avoid spoilers, just in case you want to watch it, there is a uncle and a nephew in the show that kind of travel together. And the uncle is always giving his nephew, wisdom and things like that. And for the most part, the advice is always good. But one time in the show, there's a point where the uncle had to give the nephew some good advice. It was a drastic, important decision he had to make. And the uncle told his nephew the right thing to do, but he told him he had to do it. He says, you must choose this good path. You have to do this. You don't have a choice. You have to do this. And what the uncle said was good, but he said it in kind of like in a forceful manner. He didn't mean it like that, but that's how it came off at that moment in time. Now, the nephew's sister, who was kind of like a villain of the show, if you watch it, you'll see, she came up to her brother and gave him another option, another pathway, which was the wrong decision. But she didn't force it on him. She said, it's your choice. This is an option. You can get this kind of benefit, but it's your choice. I want you to completely make this decision on your own. I'm not going to force you to do anything. And she walked off and left. And even though the uncle was leading, the nephew to the right path, the sister was more convincing. And she was more convincing because she mastered the tongue. She knew how to speak to her brother to allow him to be more to her side than the uncle did. And it's crazy, like a lot of times when we go through life, usually the best way to get people to, convince them of anything or things like that is usually not forcing them. It's letting them to make that decision on their own. It's laying out the options and saying, this is what I'm offering. You can come to me or, you don't. It is completely up to you. And I think it's important for mastering the tongue is that we seek not to force people into our mindset, but we lead people a path to get to our mindset. That is the most effective in converting people and influencing people. We say, here's a path. This is what God has to offer. This is why you should become a Christian, because this will benefit your life. But it is your choice. You have to walk this path on your own. I can't force you to walk it. I can't walk it for you, but it's there if you want it. And I think when we learn to master the tongue and we learn to have the goal of, we have a goal, we learn to speak the language of people, and we seek to, give the person understanding and not necessarily force them into any particular way, that we benefit society and people a lot more versus, this forced tongue, forcing our influence or our beliefs onto somebody, impressing it on somebody. And I think when we master the tongue, we become better Christians and we become a lot more Christ-like. But that's all I had for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it and took something forward. Please comment if you have any questions. And also subscribe so you can always get notifications. I'm not really used to the YouTube thing. I've just been doing it for a little bit, so I'm trying to get better at it. But please subscribe, and you'll get notifications when I drop a video, which is usually every Sunday morning. But have a good day, and I hope y'all still stay safe and healthy during the corona.